talking Moontrap from 1988, starring Walter Keon, of course, from Star Trek fame, and Bruce Campbell, most notable from the Evil Dead franchise. And this is directed by Robotic, who actually worked as a VFX artist on Evil Dead 2, which is how I'm assuming he knows Bruce Campbell. So this is kind of a low-budget science fiction, somewhat kind of horror film. And it's one I always really enjoyed when I was younger and I had this on kind of VHS. So what is the plot? It focuses primarily on two astronauts, Keon and Bruce Campbell's character. And they're on a kind of a mission in space doing something, and they come across what seems to be a ship. And there is kind of a hole, a breach in it where it looks like it's been damaged, and they find what looks like a strange kind of pod thing, kind of just on the entrance of this kind of like breach, and also a kind of mummified body. So they bring this back down to Earth, and they think that there's this kind of maybe like some type of evidence of something going on the kind of the moon's kind of surface, which hasn't yet been detected. So they go on a mission to kind of find out what it is, and it appears to be some type of both robotic, kind of like almost bio-robotic, I would say, life form that uses kind of scrap metal and bits and pieces what it can find to kind of build kind of constructs, and also even kind of human body parts. And we also find that there's a race of, well, there have been a race of these ancient humans who were on the moon like thousands of years before us as kind of modern humans. Now, this potentially poses a threat to humanity. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. There was actually a sequel to this one made in 2017, which I think I have reviewed on the channel, although I didn't think much of the sequel. As I mentioned, I quite enjoyed this movie when it came out on, back in the 80s, and I quite enjoyed it on the rewatch, I have to say. So you've got kind of two genre kind of, recognisable kind of like character actors here in Keon and Evil Dead. Obviously, you've got Keon kind of there for your science fiction fans, and Bruce Campbell there to kind of bring in the horror crowd. And this is a kind of sci-fi horror. I mean, you could lazily say this is comparable to a movie like Alien. I mean, it's nothing really like that, but I can imagine that's probably the quote that people would say. It's an interesting, oddly paced film in many ways, but it is quite kind of fun and has some kind of fun, kind of B-movie aesthetics to it. Now, I quite like the fact that, this is not a super science fiction. We are basically dealing with kind of modern Earth technology. So we have astronauts in kind of like moon buggies and the big, bulky kind of astronaut suits and stuff. So they are kind of like, using that kind of level, that kind of era of equipment to try and kind of find out what's kind of going on. So it's very much like the... on that kind of side of stuff. I mean, it looks kind of cheap, I would say, but it is kind of, they're not kind of going too sci-fi with the kind of what we as the human protagonists have, but there are some fun science fiction ideas with these kind of robotic life forms that, as I say, kind of use whatever they can find to kind of make these kind of constructs, and they use practical effects in the form of these kind of like sort of animatronics or kind of model work to kind of have these kind of robotic creatures, and some of them are quite fun, I have to say. The effects are a little dated, certainly, but nonetheless, there are some kind of quite kind of neat kind of fun ideas, including these kind of giant kind of like mech type things that kind of like throw our astronauts around and everything. Makes it kind of quite an interesting movie. About a third of this movie is kind of set on Earth. We actually get initially one of these kind of aliens kind of having an attack on Earth, and then the remainder of the movie is actually set on the moon. So it is actually quite an interesting kind of setting. It gives it somewhat of a kind of a nice kind of flavour to it, maybe, and it feels like something you haven't really experienced for a movie primarily set on the moon with kind of such kind of cheesy and schlocky ideas, but with kind of like all this kind of going on. So it makes it kind of a somewhat memorable in some ways. I mean, I think our two leads as well, they're kind of giving it their best, and I mean, I won't say that these two are the greatest actors ever, but they're certainly charming. Keong plays the kind of like the aging kind of astronaut, or who never kind of got a shot of kind of going on the moon until this, and Bruce Campbell plays his kind of hotshot kind of partner. Although Keong is the kind of the lead here, I think probably this day and age Bruce Campbell is more of the well-known of the duo. But they make a kind of a likeable kind of pair, constantly kind of having kind of friendly kind of snipes at each other, which is cool, quite fun. So I quite kind of like their banter, even though, if we're honest, these two are never particularly kind of like fantastic kind of actions. There are some kind of fun kind of action kind of set pieces in the movie, but like I said, it is a little bit of an odd paced movie. There's even a little bit of a romance angle in there as well. It does lead to some interesting kind of ideas. It doesn't tend to over-explain anything, but I don't think in this case the movie actually kind of needs to do it. But it has a certain kind of charm to it, which I think if you're a fan of like films that have a little bit of a schlocky side to it, you may want to check it out. So what doesn't work? As I mentioned, the pace here is a little odd. It's a little bit kind of stop and starts. I mean, it kind of slows down in places to quite a grinding halt. And there's some oddly paced scenes. For example, we have a love scene on the moon just after a death of a character, and then we have a love scene which seems odd in the circumstances. I have to say, some of the aesthetic choices are a little kind of like on the cheap side. You know, it is obviously a lower budget movie, and it does kind of reflect on what we see on the screen. There are sort of our kind of duo of astronauts seem to be able to do anything. It does strike me as a little strange that the government decides to send two astronauts up without any real military kind of backup, where they think there's a legitimate threat of kind of an alien invasion happening, and all we get is Walter Keong and Bruce Campbell trying to go out there to find out what's going on. It does seem a little ill-prepared, if you ask me, from a government standpoint. But I guess we wouldn't have a kind of a story if that, you know, if we kind of think too much about it. There are some sillier elements here. We get a kind of a female character that's introduced that is kind of, I don't know if it kind of really kind of works, to be honest. It's fun, cheesy kind of science fiction to a certain degree, but I don't think it really helps the story in any kind of way. And now the effects are extremely kind of like dated, especially when we have these things just kind of clumsily kind of lurching kind of around, you know. So it's overall, it's a little bit of a silly kind of schlocky film, but it's somewhat charming, I will say. I did still actually quite enjoy it. I don't think it's necessarily a great film. It's quite kind of, you know, amateur in its kind of feel to it. You know, it has a kind of like a somewhat of a cobbled together feel, but I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.